revolution in the Arab world. But do Western governments who claim to support democracy really want the people of the region to control their own destiny? Hello and welcome to A Simple Question with me, Phil Rees. In today's show, why is it that Arab despots are described as moderate when they're in power, but then turn into criminals and torturers when they're toppled by their own people? And if the West really believes in democracy, why is it supporting the unelected royal families in the region? Well, before we find out what the people of London think about these issues, here's a short video clip.
Since December 2010, people have challenged dictatorial leaders throughout the Arab world, some successfully, others less so. For the first time in decades, the Arab people signalled their unwillingness to live under an authoritarian rule. The first to be toppled was Tunisia's strongman Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, who was forced to step down and flee the country on the 14th of January 2011. Western governments, especially France, had supported Ben Ali's rule and described Tunisia as a successful democracy. The next to fall was the Egyptian leader Hosni Mubarak. After weeks of demonstrations in Cairo's Tahrir Square, his 20-year tenure as president of Egypt came to a swift end. On February 11th, Mubarak resigned. He was later ordered to stand trial on charges of premeditated murder for ordering the police to shoot at demonstrators. After that, the contagion of revolution spread through Yemen, Bahrain, Oman, and Libya. There were even demonstrations in the region's most tightly controlled nation, Saudi Arabia. Western powers had been surprised and wrong-footed by events in Egypt and Tunisia. So when an uprising began in the eastern Libyan city of Benghazi, France and Britain led the passing of UN Security Council Resolution 1973. The resolution authorized a no-fly zone and all necessary measures to enforce it in order to protect civilians under threat of attack from the Libyan regime. NATO assumed command of military operations, and the resolution provided cover for Western special forces and intelligence officers to work on the ground in Libya alongside the rebels. In stark contrast to the defense of rebels in Libya, the West remained largely silent about uprising against the region's royal families. In Bahrain, thousands of protesters gathered in the capital, Manama, but a crackdown aided by Saudi troops soon resulted in the deaths of dozens of protesters. However, it is by no means clear how the political makeup of a post-revolutionary Arab world will unfold. The parties that are expected to dominate the post-revolution elections are Islamist rather than secular. After years of suppression and the arrest of their members, Islamist parties are emerging as a powerful force in democratic elections in the region. But Egypt's military receives billions of dollars of US aid each year. The question that many are asking is whether the military will allow an Islamist party to form a democratic government that introduces Islamic law and changes its foreign policy, especially towards Israel.
A Simple Question is a show that finds out what the public thinks here on the streets of London. I began by asking what people knew about the revolutions that have been taking place in the Arab world over the past year and why they thought they'd happened.
Yeah, well, I know about, where there's been big movements like in Egypt, obviously in Libya, where there's a lot of suppression and nothing happening, like in Syria. I think it's terrible what's happening in Bahrain as well. I've read a lot about that. Just because it's a small country, tiny population, 800,000, it's criminal what's going on there. But we turn a blind eye, and we've just looked at Libya, but it's criminal what's happening in other countries as well.
Well, what I know is what I saw on TV. The population not happy with the dictator over there, so they try to get freedom.
I guess there's been a lot about people refusing to, people wanting change in their lives, people wanting better living conditions, better, job opportunities, that kind of thing, and so they don't feel like their leaders are doing enough to help them. They want people who are actually going to help them to live a better life, I guess.
Well, I was very surprised to find that the oppressive regimes in several countries like Egypt disappeared so quickly. That was very surprising, I think.
What do you know about the revolutions that have been taking place in the Middle East over the last year?
I just know there's been Arab uprising. Started off in Egypt, and it's spread throughout the Arab Peninsula. That's about it, really.
Well, I mean, I'm obviously aware of what happened in Egypt to start off with, which seemed to be what kicked everything off. And that seemed to have stalled at the moment, but that seems to have gone on to various other countries within the Middle East, but none of which have really completely sorted themselves out. And obviously Libya is the one that everybody's looking at the moment, because, you know, that seems to have been a revolution which has succeeded potentially, whereas we're waiting to see what happens in the other countries.
Basically, in the Middle East, different countries are having problems with the leaders, with the political situation in the Middle East, in the Southeast Asia is very bad because of the corrupt politicians. And, you know, the people want change, like the normal people. They want democracy, they want more of freedom, which the people are not getting. So that's the problem over there. That's the main problem. They want change, and the political parties are not expecting any changes, and they want the corrupt system going on. That's what I think.
Then when these pictures come out through the world and saw the people protest to the government, then the West world just turned like that, and suddenly we're with the people. But I think we in the Western world have really a lot of responsibility of what happened in the Arabic countries for the past 50 years.
Why do you think it happened in so many countries in the Middle East and North Africa?
I think it's probably, my opinion is it's down to the access to information driven by the digital age. I think people can see what's going on in other countries far more easily than they could before. Governments are struggling to control the population as they were able to before, and I think therefore they want some of that for themselves.
It's a lit match in pine straw, you know. It's a chain effect, you know, when you see others do it, even with the severe consequences that death, beatings, there's still a sense of if they are willing to fight for what we want for themselves, then why wouldn't we fight for what we want ourselves? And being young people and mostly college-educated people who are part of the revolution, I think that they inspire one another.
I think it started in one place, and then people realized they would be able to do the same in their own countries, and being encouraged by what was happening in other countries.
Why do you think they happened?
I think it was only a matter of time, really, with all these dictators, the way they've been treating their people. And I think something sparked it off. I think it was a fruit stall or something. And I think they were just looking for something to start it off, really. That's about it.
Gosh, I think that's incredibly hard. I guess they feed off each other. And history tends not in the end to believe that single sparks cause it. And even as I've said that word, I'm sort of alarmed at the pun I've made, because of course there was there not, in one of the countries, and I don't know which one, the guy set fire to himself in some form of protest.
In Tunisia.
In Tunisia, that's right, which we're then told, it's a horrible pun, isn't it? How can I say it? Which was the germ that it fed off, but I guess that's probably oversimplified. But why now? I'm pretty sure it's exponential, one feeds off the other, and in these days of mass communication of all sorts and very democratic forms of communication which can't really be controlled, I guess that's more likely to happen.
I think it was due to happen. I mean, I think the West had been supporting pretty disastrous regimes, and, you know, at one stage, you know, somebody was going to kick off at one stage and go, you know, we want democracy just like the West have got democracy, so why shouldn't we have it? And the West didn't step in at that particular time to support the current leaderships.
Well, that's a heavy question. I've no idea. I presume one thing triggers another, But I mean, I couldn't possibly guess at why that's begun to happen. Very difficult.
Well, those were the views of the people on the streets of London. Now let's find out what our experts think.
Those resentments that have been bubbling under the surface in a number of countries in the region for years now have come to the fore. And we also can't rule out the significant factor that modern 21st century technology and communication plays in all of this. Now it's possible for somebody in Hama or Homs in Syria to view what is going on in Tahrir Square in Egypt, for example, moments after somebody films something on a mobile phone's camera and uploads it to YouTube. We've also seen the fantastic use of social networking sites such as Twitter and Facebook by protesters. And I think for the first time we really can now say that the Arab governments across the region have lost the monopoly of information, and this has been a crucial factor in helping those protests spread out from that core starting point in Tunisia across the region to challenge the political supremacy of so many of those regimes that were happily ensconced in power for many decades.
I think it's something that many that observe the Middle East almost said, why it doesn't happen? Because the conditions for revolution been there. For anyone that observed revolution or studied revolution since the French Revolution onward, say, if you have a rising middle class, if you have corruption, if you have non-representative government, you have all this put together, and in the Middle East even more than in many other places in the world, you expect people to go to the street and actually tell the government, you know, we want a change, we want you out. And that's what happened, whether in Tunisia, in Egypt, you have dictators, decades and decades of dictatorship. But it's not just political dictatorship, it's the corruption in which there is more and more youth which is unemployed, unemployable, and as a result of the disempowered. So it was, in many ways, it needed a trigger. What happened in Tunisia was exactly the trigger that these societies were looking for.
So why have Western powers for decades propped up authoritarian leaders in the Middle East and North Africa? They were staunch supporters of Ben Ali, of Mubarak, and even Gaddafi, until they were about to be toppled. So why now are these same Western powers supporters of the revolutions? Let's find out what the public think about that.
Because they saw a potential for gaining more political allies and therefore getting a larger cut of oil reserves and other such things.
Why do you think the West supported these dictators for so many years?
For their own ends, for economic gain, and to exploit those countries in the way that suited them best and to maintain stability that would suit their needs.
Oil, it's all about oil. I mean, so they supported the current regimes because it suited the West to get the oil, and when they saw that maybe that wasn't going to suit them, they went and supported the other side because, you know, they felt that when democracy came that maybe they would be given a favourable deal as opposed to as for the oil in this sense. So, I mean, I'm totally cynical about the West's stance on all of this.
Well, it is because of it's an interest to them. Obviously Libya, because of the oil.
Now, these tyrants that you spoke about, these were actually backed by the West for many years. I mean, why do you think that was the case?
Well, I think various reasons. To some extent, self-interest or economic interest, one has to say, and one could be cynical about that to some extent, but partly I think because the feeling was that it wasn't possible to intervene in these regimes, whether it be the Middle East or in, for example, Zimbabwe, where there are limits to what Western democracies or anybody else can impose from outside or how far they can influence.
Well, speaking for the United States, not for the United States, but from the United States, I think I mean this in the least offensive way possible, but talk is cheap, and saying you support something and acting upon it are two totally different things. It's one thing to say something as a politician to appease and please, and then it's a totally different thing to keep your mouth shut and become part of a movement. I haven't seen that from anybody on either side, whether they oppose it or they're for it. they've never given any action to show that they really are willing to spill some of their own blood like those people have to gain the same freedoms, you know? It's very easy to talk.
Why do you think that Western governments supported these dictators for many years when they were in power?
Well, there is quite a lot of evidence that suggests a dictatorship actually is better for the people in some places than a democracy, certainly on economic grounds. So I can see some good reasons for governments supporting them because the outcome for the people can be better. And if you're not going to topple it, then best support it and try and make the most of the people. But I think that's changing now.
I guess maybe they figured change had to happen, and if they continue to be on the side of the dictators, I guess you could say, they're supporting the oppression of human rights, I guess. I mean, they wouldn't want to be seen to be, to be adding to the problem, I guess.
Why do you think the West is involved in supporting revolutionaries, say, in Libya, but not in Bahrain or the Yemen, for example?
I actually thought about that because in Sweden it's been on the news a lot, and they have just covered like one country at each, and it feels like some of the countries they haven't even brought it up. But I also think it must been some main interest left in those countries, so they don't feel that it's worth it to support the people yet.
Well, we know why, because they like stability, they like the Middle East to be nice and quiet, it's good for everybody in commerce and so on, so oil and the rest of it, so that's why. And also you like stability because it's predictable, or seems to be predictable. Trouble is, because it snaps and then you've lost it, but that's why. I mean, the Americans always thought that a good, firm, authoritarian ruler is longer lasting than a democratic one, but they don't think that now because they see it's less flexible.
Differing views there from the public. So let's find out what our experts think.
I think first of all it's important to state that it's not just the West that could perhaps be accused of hypocrisy in their dealings with the Middle East. I think if you look with any significant political actor in their dealings with the region, nobody can claim a holier-than-thou approach to the Arab world, be it America, the UK and France, or Turkey, Iran and Russia. All of them view the region through their own narrow interests, which generally boil down to short-term stability and short-term interests. With particular regard, however, to the West and their approach to this, I think what we've seen is governments take a step back and examine what was going on in each country on an individual case-by-case basis, rather than coming with some kind of blanket approach to the uprisings. So, for example, if we look at Egypt, the US and the UK stood by Hosni Mubarak, a traditional long-term ally of the West, for quite a while into the protests. It wasn't until it became quite apparent that the protesters in Tahrir Square were going nowhere until their demands were met that the Western governments finally withdrew their support for Mubarak. Contrast this with Libya, for example, where they were a lot quicker to withdraw any support that existed for the Gaddafi regime, and then of course to join in with the opposition movements and play a crucial role in the overthrow of the regime in Tripoli.
It's about the national interest, and I think that again a lot of experts told, whether it's the British government or the rest of the West, and America, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't support this regime. If you are serious about democracy, if you are serious about good governance and transparency and human rights, the people can see that on the one hand you say all these fancy words, but at the same time you support the most oppressive regimes. It won't wash with the population, and that's what led probably. That's what happened in Iran in 1979, with supporting for years and years the Shah and talking about the need for democracy. It won't wash with the people. The same was with Mubarak and Gaddafi, and we see, for instance, with the paper found of the connection between some secret agencies and the Gaddafi. And you know what? People don't like it because they felt they're made fool of all this time. Now, I think the West needs to decide once and for all. I think all society needs to decide, where do we really stand? What do we tell the population, different what our actual policies? And those who think that security comes first, whatever it means security, for some of these organizations, in the name of security, we basically neglect human rights. We cooperate with oppressive regimes, violent regimes, just because we think it's in the name of our national interest, the name of security. I think in the long run it will actually come to haunt all of this, of these societies that cooperate. It helps these regimes to stay in power and oppress their people.
The British government was very keen to send its military forces to help overthrow a dictatorship in Libya, but no help was offered to topple a similar dictatorship in Bahrain, where an uprising was also taking place. Well, why is that? And also, do people here believe that the Egyptian revolution, where Hosni Mubarak stepped down and the army took over, was a genuine one? Or will the most significant social and political changes happen sometime in the future? Let's find out what the people think.
I wouldn't want to speak on it because I don't know quite enough. I assume that in every situation, in my experience and from my knowledge, when it deals with politics, it's dealing with money. And every politician I have seen has been very cautious to make sure that the lining of their pockets don't wear thin. So I couldn't say for sure, but I imagine that might be in play.
I think there's no logic in this. It doesn't seem to make sense.
Again, we've got very strong ties with Bahrain and that part of the Middle East. And with Libya, no. I think, again, it's just the oil. It's politics as well.
So why do you think that Britain supported the revolutionaries in, say, Libya, but didn't in Bahrain or Yemen?
Do you know, I don't know, but I suspect Bahrain is a hugely economic issue around our interests. We probably have fewer interests. I'm not sure about this, but I would guess Libya would have been an Italian colony, so maybe we never had that tradition that we've had in Bahrain of our own huge financial input into the country. Yemen I'm not so sure about. Yemen I'm more puzzled by, I guess.
Do you think that when it comes to democracy, the West takes into account its strategic and economic interests above simple democracy?
Yeah, just look at Palestine, for example. Absolutely.
There's a lot of inconsistency about that. I think it's partly the art of the possible. It's partly not wanting to have a battle on too many fronts at the same time. Libya, I think, because there was a groundswell they'd started already in the east of the country in Benghazi to motivate and to also get everybody moving, mobilize rather, the troops that they felt that they could actually get on the bandwagon and make a change quite quickly. It wasn't as quick as they'd hoped.
Maybe Bahrain and Yemen are more powerful and for maybe, again, oil reasons and financial reasons, political reasons. That's what I could think of, really.
It's not about democracy, then, is it, in your view?
No. Not at all.
Do you think the revolution in Egypt, when Mubarak stepped aside and the army took over, was a genuine one, or do you think that there'll be more significant changes to come?
Well, I think it's a genuine uprising. The revolution is almost just starting in terms of how that pans out. I think there's some concerns about whether the army will hold on to power too long. There's some big concerns about what the mix of the forces coming forward, the different political interests would be. They're not there yet. I think it has to be evolution, but it needs a progressive stance. It needs a lot of things to happen and a lot of things to go right before there's much chance of real success.
I'm afraid that the same people are going to lead the country, but it's just another name. So it's very hard to say yet, but you must have hope still.
The real change is definitely still to come. I can't believe the stuff I've been seeing. The U.S. news stations don't show as graphic material as I've been seeing on your Skybox and whatnot here. So seeing tanks running over people and whatnot is definitely disturbing imagery that I had known about, but I hadn't seen it. So now that I'm visualizing it, I can see that with things like that still happening, we are certainly far from change. But they're fighting for it, you know.
No, it's stalled, hasn't it? I mean, the military is still in power. So we'll just have to see what happens when supposedly elections take place. But, you know, I mean, what's been happening with the Christians and the Muslims going on there at the moment is really worrying as far as I can see.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, and thank you for joining us. If you've got anything to say yourself, send an email to asimplequestion@presstv.com. That's asimplequestion@presstv.com. Meanwhile, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.